Good morning, Prof. Limonier.
Good morning.
I see from your submission that you are currently the CASTEX Chair of Cyber Strategy at the French Institute of Geopolitics. Could you just very briefly elaborate on the role that you play there, please?
Okay, of course. Well, in fact, French Institute of Geopolitics and CASTEX Chair are two different institutions. French Institute of Geopolitics is university, and CASTEX Chair is part of the National Institute for Defense Studies. It's under the authority of the Prime Minister, and it's funded by private French sector. So French Institute of Geopolitics is basically made for forming new students and personals, while CASTEX Chair is made for research, doing research.
And in what area would that research be?
Sorry?
What area would that research be?
My area of research is dedicated to study many aspects of the Russian-speaking cyberspace, and especially the so-called Russian influence during the French election campaign, which was a research project we had in the chair of cyber strategy, and which is presented in the report I transmitted to your parliament.
Yes, thank you. In fact, your report elaborates on the expanding role of Russia in cyberspace and using disinformation to destabilize individual states. That would be an accurate summary of the submission you have put in.
Yes, I would say also that this is a scientific essay to measure what remains unmeasurable, because measuring, quantifying the influence and the impact of an information campaign is something that is very difficult to do, maybe even impossible. So here is we could say a scientific experience, empirical experience based on the French campaign.
Right. Now, your submission we've all considered it. I'd like to take you through some passages from your submission, and then at the appropriate juncture, ask you to elaborate on them. Now, it's not your submission is not paginated, so I've started page 1 as a reference point. As the first page where your title appears and address appears. So using that as a reference, okay?
Okay.
Now, could you then go to page 2?
Yeah, of course.
Yes. So you start by saying that outlining the role that Russia has played in two recent electoral campaigns in France and the US. And you've also outlined the expansion of two Russian media networks, the RT and the Sputnik News, and the role they have played in the context of these two elections. Would you briefly elaborate on that, please?
Yes, of course. In fact, we chose to focus on RT and Sputnik because they are the two flagship of the Russian influence abroad, and especially in the English-spoken world and in the French-spoken world, because we are not talking only about United States or France, but also, for example, the former French colonial empire, a big part of Africa, which is also a target for the Russian influence. And in fact, RT and Sputnik are two structures that are publicly funded, that are producing information material which are not specifically only fake news. In fact, we found only just a few fake news during the French election produced by the Russian, but they produce misinformation material, which can be mobilized by political activists in France, political activists which have nothing to do with Russia, but who will take for them the material produced in Moscow in order to fulfill their own political agenda.
Right.
So
At page 5 of your submission, somewhere towards the second half of the page, you say here that Sputnik and RT have been progressively gaining recognition in Europe. Presumably that's because it's an English language publication, and also because it's designed largely to capture that audience. Would that be correct?
Yes, it is correct. In fact, I'm sorry, I don't find the word in English, but the editorial line is that a correct? The way they produce information is designed for European lectors and for European clients, consumers, and especially, in fact, RT and Sputnik, they have some local redactions, some local staffs. For example, in France, there are many French-speaking and even French people working for RT and Sputnik to advise and even to produce some material information that will be useful in some political agenda for some activists and some candidates in the French political life. So basically, some of the information produced by Sputnik, for example, they have practically nothing to do with Russia. They are produced in France, for example, by French people, for French people. Only the money is Russian.
Is Russian, right. So it's targeted for a specific audience outside of Russia, in this case,
absolutely.
France.
Yes.
You go on in this paragraph to say that Sputnik and RT are mostly broadcasting fake news and conspiracy articles, all in the context of global misinformation, serving the interests of the Kremlin. That would be the modus operandi on which they would operate. Would that be correct?
I won't say that they are broadcasting mainly fake news. In fact, RT and Sputnik have a strategy that is based on digital marketing. In fact, they were one of the first in the Western world, maybe in Asia, but there are others example, but I don't know. But in the Western world and in Europe, RT was the first media outlet that used aggressive digital marketing strategies to gain some public. Because when they were created, when they were funded, and when they were given more and more money in 2012, for example, they knew that to gain more audience, to be like BBC or whoever, they needed to be aggressive to make the buzz, and to be very popular on the social networks. And I won't say that there is so much fake news, but it's all about buzz and about clickbait. Okay, that is to say, publishing some funny pictures, for example, in order to engage people to like and to share, and then to take advantage of the social network algorithms.
Right. So what you're saying is that they would purvey information that is attractive, they dress it up in a certain narrative, you call it clickbait, which is to entice the viewer to get onto the site itself, and then using the mechanism or the modality of social media networks, would then use that to transmit to a much broader audience. I think the word you use is to then gain optimal visibility. That's a fair assessment of the modality in which this is being purveyed?
Yes, it is.
Right. Now,
optimization, yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You also spend some time in your report at page 7 to talk about the social networks on which it is carried. So you have, for example, a statement which says that it's very efficiently carried on Facebook. Would you care to elaborate on that?
On Facebook, I'm sorry, page 7.
Look at page 7, just above the footnote number 20, the paragraph before that.
Okay. I'm just reading, sorry.
Two paragraphs above, it starts with, to enlarge their audience, Russian media outlets follow practices, and so on. And the next paragraph then talks about Facebook in particular.
Yes, 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 of course. The problem here is that it is not an hypothesis. It is proved that media outlet like Russia Today, for example, engaged, as I said, in a digital marketing strategy to take, as I said, also advantage to the algorithms of the social networks, and especially on Facebook, where mechanisms of radicalization can be encouraged by what we call the algorithm jail. That is to say, the fact that you will only see the news and the contents that the algorithm will judge for you, that you might like it. So you will have just only one point of view. And we made several tests, for example, on creating fake profiles on Facebook just to test the algorithms and to see if it is true by liking Russia Today and pro-Russia things, etc., etc. And in fact, a week later, you only have this kind of information. And for you, if Facebook, for many people, if Facebook is your only source of information, the world for you will rapidly look like what these kind of actors want you to see. So this is a kind of digital jail, basically.
Right. So a combination of having very attractive articles packaged nicely in the form of a clickbait, together with the transmission powers of social media networks and the algorithm settings, you then end up seeing only what you would have previously clicked on by reason of the clickbait. And then what you're saying is thereafter you only get fed this kind of information.
Yes, yes, yes. I don't know, maybe that Facebook, for example, took some measures. I know that they changed something in their algorithms, but the problem is that for us researchers, academics, it's very difficult to take in contact with these platforms in order to exchange, because it's an industrial secret for them, and so there is here something very complicated to make some fieldwork and to understand the mechanisms of so-called, for example, radicalization, because we are not only talking about Russia here; it's a more global problem.
Right. Now you've also got at page 8. I'm at page 8 now. You also have a very interesting comment on Twitter and what you've done in terms of a cartography. I'd like you to look at the paragraph at page 8, the bottom half of page 8, right through to the cartography that you set out at page 9, and perhaps take us through and explain the diagram that you have put in your submission. Yes, that's the one.
Yes, I see it.
Yes. Are you there? Page 9. Would you like to take us through this diagram?
I am.
Yes.
Yes. Well, this diagram, in fact, represents what we detected as not pro-Russian relays in France, but all the accounts on Twitter that we can reasonably consider as relays of information produced by Moscow. These accounts, there are approximately 100,700, for instance. These accounts were detected using two methods. Well, it could take many times to explain the method in detail, but let's say that this is a combination of two detection methods, a qualitative combination, that is to say the manual identification of some accounts that we know are actually relays of Russian contacts on French-speaking social networks, and a quantitative method based on how much time these accounts will share each day, for example, Russian-made contents. And in fact, we used here the Twitter API to, well, identify their accounts, then identify who is following who, and then elaborate this graph, which is in fact an algorithmic graph using an algorithm which will place the dots in function of the number of links all the dots of the picture have. I'm not sure it's clear, but in fact, when 2 points are very close on this graph, they have a lot of interactions. When they are very far from each other, they have just a few interactions. And what is interesting here is that this ecosystem is composed of 3 communities. The first communities you see at the right in the bottom, and the community in the middle are 2 communities made of far-right accounts. That is to say, accounts allegedly held by people that are close to far-right parties in France and who share some Russian contents on a daily basis. And the third community is the community of journalists and far-left pro-Russian contents. So here it was a test for us, once we identified all these accounts, to understand the ecosystem. And in fact, the ecosystem of the people who are sharing pro-Russian, Russian-made contents is not homogeneous. All these people, they don't speak all together. And that's why, for example, you have 2 far-right communities, and these 2 far-right communities, there are just a few links between them, because one of these communities is based on the support of Russia in the context of the Ukrainian crisis, while the other community is supporting Ukraine against Russia. So there are some controversies which divide very strongly the community, this community.
Right. You then go on to talk about bots in the next couple of pages. And if I can just summarize it as, if you have these bots who can be automatically generated, that would just exacerbate the transmission of the information via social media networks that we've just discussed. Would that be right?
Yes. In fact, bots are here kind of, how can I call it? A kind of mass information weapon, I would say so, because they participate in creating fake buzz. They participate in increasing the audience. You know, when you see a content that has been shared several times, you will tend to believe what is in this content because it has been shared and read by many people before you. So yes, we elaborated some methods to detect these bots. And in fact, it appears that in our database of pro-Russian, relays of Russian information in France, there is a certain number of bots. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. So, going to your summary at page 14, if I can just put together what I draw from the summary that you've set out here. So you have, on the one hand, misinformation or information that's packaged in very superficially attractive styles to bait an audience. Then you establish an undeniable following, in your words, of the target audience that you wish to engage. And that's enhanced by the use of social media networks, which has a certain algorithm pattern, enhanced further by having bots, which then optimizes visibility and number of clicks that you share. And all of that can become a very powerful purveyor of false information or misinformation to the target audience. And that can in turn then be used to destabilize and unsettle states or events such as an election in the US and in France as examples. Would that be a fair summary?
It's a fair summary, but I would add that all these things we are talking about today, there is a danger of seeing it as information operations that might have been thought and organized in a vertical way by the Russian power. I think it's much more complicated than this. Even in the US case, where the FBI has now some evidence of some troll factories in St. Petersburg that might have meddled in the electoral process, there is no Russian information operation in the sense of a military operation. Yeah, it's much more complicated. And in fact, these kind of problematics are 90% home problematics. Russians are just the symptoms of a wider problem, which is the audience, because there is an audience for this kind of contents, and this is the main problem, according to me. All the rest there, it's just the analysis of vectors, and that is what I propose here. But in fact, there wouldn't be any vectors if there would be any audience for it. So it's basically, most of all, an internal problem. Russians are just exploiting the weaknesses of our democracies.
Yes, thank you. Just a last point on your final paragraph at page 14. You then spend some time explaining what tools have been developed to counter this, and you say that so far these tools have been limited, largely due to divergences between the member states. I guess that's really a sign of the fact that you just can't get the act together to effectively and cohesively counter what the Russians have put out via these networks.
Yeah.
Fair?
Yes, yes, absolutely. What we tend to say in this conclusion is that unfortunately the data that are given to us by the social media platforms are not enough to do a serious job. So we do what we can do with the data we have. And there is no countermeasures that can be implemented in that way. Only what we can do and what we try to do is to alert citizens on how misinformation campaigns work in order to make them more aware the next time. Because there is a question here, and it is the teacher who is speaking now. There is a question of digital literacy that has to be built in our democratic societies.
Right. But one of the reasons why the response to misinformation has not been more successful is also because it's being portrayed as a denial of democracy. And this in turn has also contributed to the success of the misinformation campaigns. Would that be right?
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Prof. Limonier. Thank you, Chairman.